CBR has had some bad takes. Like, really, really bad takes. But I read two articles the other day that actually blew my mind. I mean, I genuinely have trouble believing anyone could be this ridiculously stupid. Fantasy isn't for everyone. My dad, for example, isn't a big fan of it. He struggled to sit through the first Lord of the Rings movie, and he found Harry Potter kind of annoying, though easily quotable. So I understand people telling me that they just aren't into fantasy. But CBR just doesn't understand fantasy, it seems. At all. Let's look at the 10 fantasy tropes that CBR says are just the worst. 10 worst tropes in fantasy movies. Like any genre, fantasy heavily relies on tropes to tell a story. Some of these tropes end up hurting the movie more than helping them. By William Margulis. Published November 17th, 2022. Fantasy stories have roots in legends and fairy tales. Stories originally formulated to teach history and practical knowledge about the world. Though they've been refined over the course of centuries, even millennia in some cases, there are some glaringly outdated patterns and tropes that find their way into the bulk of fantasy stories. These tropes represent the history and foundation of fantasy storytelling, so they will never fully go away. But that does not mean that they have to continue to define the genre. By using these patterns conservatively and including modern storytelling conventions, fantasy can redefine itself and gain new ground. This introduction already should be giving you red flags. Note how in this last paragraph the author says, these tropes represent the history and foundation of fantasy storytelling. Then goes on to say, but that doesn't mean they have to fully define the genre. By using modern storytelling conventions, fantasy can redefine itself. Several problems right off the back there. Firstly, if these tropes represent the history and foundation of fantasy, then they cannot be and should not be messed with, as without them, fantasy as a whole may be irreparably altered. Secondly, you want to use modern storytelling conventions. But if you're telling fantasy stories of the past, like Cinderella, Aladdin, or Princess and the Frog, then why would you want to use modern conventions to replace the old tried and true? What could modern storytelling conventions offer that the original conventions did not? And finally, you fully admit you want to redefine fantasy. This is dangerous territory. You want to redefine a literary genre that is rooted in our cultures across the world. You want to rewrite its existence into a manner that you want to, and that right there is disgusting. Whether you like it or not, fantasy is often grounded in our culture and history. Redefining it for the modern generation will neuter it and devalue it, and, in essence, harm our culture by not allowing us to understand and respect the conventions of our culture. In simple terms, you want to insert modern lexicons and current socially acceptable things into ancient and tried writing styles so that it can become more suitable for your wants. I hate to say it, CBR, but Disney, Marvel, and Lucasfilms have been trying that for the past few years, and the results have shown that it is a terrible path to walk. Number 10. Pure good is hubris. Fantasy stories seem to put positive spins on grisly events, often sanitize their details by painting their protagonist in an unrealistically positive light. As a result, characters like Prince Charming from Cinderella are flawless. He is defined by his handsomeness and charm, obviously, but those qualities are far outstripped by his righteousness. These heroes may be romantic and simplistic in a way that's designed to appeal to children, but it teaches some dangerous lessons. These stories have no room for nuance. The perfect hero is almost always opposed by a heartless, ugly villain. It is good to teach children to fight for good, but not at the expense of writing off everyone who opposes their views. I don't think I've ever heard something so mind-numbingly stupid, but maybe I'll be surprised later. You heard that right, folks. CBR has just said openly that it's good for children to learn to fight for what's right, but not if it means writing off the views of people who disagree. First off, I'd like to take a moment and acknowledge their example was Prince Charming from Cinderella, and how he was not only handsome and charming, but more than that, completely righteous. Did you watch Cinderella? Firstly, his name is Christopher. Secondly, what did he do that was righteous? He literally yawns at how boring the night's festivities are, sees Cinderella out of the crowd, hurries off to meet her, dances with her, spends an evening with her, and then she takes off leaving him with nothing but a glass slipper. He then doesn't appear again until the end of the movie where they get married. What did he do that was righteous or good? How about we use a better example to fit your narrative? Prince Philip. He actually does do something righteous. He fights to rescue Aurora from Maleficent. It's a shame I actually have to improve your own arguments for you, but, there you go. So now on to your next point. You say that these heroes, Philip in this case, are simplistic to appeal to children. But there's a dangerous lesson involved. Oh no, you think that children will somehow get the message that they should, in their quest to fight for good, dismiss the views of their opposition. Given that Maleficent was attempting to kill an innocent girl and tried to kill Prince Philip by turning into a dragon, I think it's safe to say her views aren't worth debating or entertaining.
Now shall you deal with me, O Prince, and all the powers of hell!
The villains in these fantasy stories are the epitome of evil in most cases, and thus the heroes are the epitome of righteousness. That's a classic fairy tale and fantasy trope, the battling of good versus evil.
Thou sword of truth, fly swift and sure, that evil die and good endure.
Of course it's simplistic because they are meant to teach children what evil looks like and what good looks like. It's very easily digestible morality. Evil is harming an innocent woman. Good is fighting the monster to save her. It's not meant to be nuanced. It's fine if you want to explore why the villains are evil or what they believe, but the truth is that sometimes fighting for good means you must fight against evil. My final point is this. If you aren't prepared to slay the dragon in front of you, then I hope you're prepared to burn. I will not entertain the views of evil when that evil is threatening the things I love. To quote a famous Christian scholar, Max Lucado, quote, "There are many unacceptable reasons for war. Imperialism, financial gain, religion, family feuds, racial arrogance. There are many unacceptable motives for war, but there is one time when war is condoned and used by God: to oppose wickedness." Number 9, evil races do not exist. The myth of the evil race is one that humanity still has trouble leaving behind. This trope exists in almost every culture, and it is carried over notably into fantasy movies. These groups are defined by their nature as violent soldiers, usually in service to some dark lord. The Lord of the Rings has multiple examples of evil races alongside the nations of men pledged to Sauron. The orcs of Middle-earth have different origins from every other group, created as corruptions, specifically meant to spawn more evil. These races have no hope for redemption, and so must be totally destroyed, eliminating any complications like empathy or forgiveness. It seems you and Extra Credits have a lot in common, so I'll ask you the same thing I asked Extra Credits. What's wrong with evil races in fantasy? Orcs aren't real. In Lord of the Rings, orcs are an invented fantasy race created for the purpose of being minions to the evil Dark Lord. It might surprise you to know that evil Dark Lords, orcs, and evil minions do not exist in the real world. The charm of fantasy is that we know it's not real and we are willing to entertain a made-up story and world. You failed to explain why this trope is bad. Is it because you think it's wrong that orcs can't be redeemed and they are simply a savage and violent race? Well, what's wrong with that? It creates an easy to recognize and fight against foe for the heroes. Why is that a problem? What does it hurt? Please, explain why this is a problem in fantasy. Why is it wrong to oppose obvious violence and evil? And if you dare to tie in the real-world examples of actual races or actual peoples, I'll gladly remind you once again, orcs are not real people. They are not real in general. Oh no, I'm racist against orcs. Oh, Orc Clayer, I'm so sorry. Please don't goblinate me. Number 8. The Chosen One is a lazy explanation. The Chosen One is one of fantasy's most overused tropes. From Luke Skywalker to Harry Potter, these figures are placed in the path of danger by destiny and destroy evil, not because of their choices, but because it's their cosmic role. This trope, perhaps due to its overuse, has lost all narrative excitement and even in the best cases, can come off as unnecessary. For example, in The Mummy Returns, Rick O'Connell has already been facing the forces of supernatural evil in some form for over a decade, when the movie explains that he is actually descended from an ancient order of monster slayers. This change only removed Rick's power as a protagonist, making him theoretically more important and less human at the same time. Oh, no, there's no question that this trope can be overdone, and it certainly isn't the strongest, but it does bring about the question of predetermination versus free choice. Did Luke fight the Empire because it was his destiny, or because he wanted to? Did Harry Potter defeat Lord Voldemort because he wanted to, or because he was destined to? Well, that is a really cool question. On the one hand, If it was all just prophecy or destiny that they do it, was there any victory in it? Was it really worth the efforts that they went through? Are they even people to look up to if their entire destiny defines what they will do? It has nothing to do with who they are, but what they will be preordained to do. I mean, that's an interesting topic to discuss. But at the same time, what about the decisions they made along the way, the self-sacrifices and actions along the path to victory that defined who they were, like the relationships they made along the way? For example, imagine if Harry Potter had grown up as an absolute asshole. He joined Slytherin and even joined up with Voldemort in the end. Because remember, Voldemort offered him the chance in the first book to join him. What if he decided to? Only later on to stab him in the back and become the new Dark Lord. I mean, technically, he fulfills the Chosen One prophecy. He killed Voldemort. But it sure was a subversion. I mean, that was interesting. That was unique. Therefore, his choice did make something of a difference. As Dumbledore wisely put in the second book or movie,
"It is not our abilities that show what we truly are. It is our choices."
In fact, Lark and I have been thinking on a story where we subvert this trope, where a colony uses a made-up Chosen One prophecy to encourage two young youths to lead a rebellion against an oppressive king, only to learn that the Chosen One prophecy was made up. So now the two youths have to determine if they will still lead this rebellion despite that. I think, if written well, the Chosen One trope can be still very interesting to still play with. Though, granted, I admit there are times it can feel a little weird or forced, so I'll grant you that. Number 7, ancient mentors need to learn. Sometimes it seems like every fantasy story involves a hero meeting an old man in a dark cave who changes his life. These ancient mentors may provide specific instructions or just some cryptic advice, but these figures are everywhere. In fantasy, old men are fountains of ancient wisdom, and for these stories, the truth always lies in ancient knowledge. It's a compelling idea, but this trope is often overused in specific properties like Star Wars, and ignores the widening gap in generational knowledge. The real world has a more complicated relationship with knowledge. Experience counts for a lot, but it doesn't always bring moral clarity, and it sometimes keeps people from understanding newly understood truths. Do you even hear what you just said? So to clarify for those who don't understand the words of the stupid, what was just said was, while wise mentors may be a source of ancient wisdom, this doesn't mesh well with the real world, wherein the older generation may have experience, but it doesn't always mesh with moral alterations of a society or newfound knowledge. The problem with this is that the mentor character is not there to teach the hero moral guidelines or societal rules. It is expected that the hero already has a strong moral compass of their own, and they are already familiar with the rules of society. The mentor's goal, therefore, is to guide the hero down the path that will help them achieve either power, knowledge, or victory. Yoda was not trying to teach Luke moral lessons about the world, but how to feel and understand the Force.
Its energy surrounds us and binds us. Luminous beings, are we? Not this crude matter.
All Might is not there to teach Deku morality. In fact, in some ways, Deku surprised All Might with his moral compass. The fact that he was willing to rush into battle and to save someone even though he had no power to do so. Sometimes, the mentor can be encouraged by the mentee.
I'm not done. You told me you didn't have a power. So when I saw this timid, quirkless boy try to save a life, it inspired me to act too.
And it is then therefore necessary that they help the mentee, the hero, grow and become stronger through their experiences and understanding. The mentor has experience and knowledge that the hero requires to succeed in their goal and quest, and the mentor's job is to provide this. You make it sound like because the older generation came from a different time where morals were different and societal rules were different, they must not have anything meaningful to teach us, when that is absolutely not true. I'll be honest, guys, I'm sick of this okay boomer idiocy, where we dismiss the wisdom of our elders just because they're older than us. I learned so much from my father, mother, grandparents, and teachers, all of whom are older than me and come from a different generation. Yes, our society has changed from their time. But take a good look around at the society we live in and really ask yourself, is this a society you're happy to live in? Maybe instead of dismissing our mentors, we should hear what they have to tell us. Because this is actually disgusting what you're saying. I've never actually heard someone advocate that we should ignore the previous generations, but there it is. Number 6. Not all magic happens in medieval Europe. Fantasy has its origins in every culture in the world, and magical stories have pervaded every time period and place. It seems like an oversight that almost all modern fantasy films take place in some version of medieval Europe. There are a million explanations for why fantasy movies usually use medieval Europe as a setting, but sticking to the same place ultimately limits the stories. Expanding fantasy settings across many cultures and time periods creates infinite possibilities. A simple adjustment, like shifting its location, can dramatically change a movie's tone. Fantasy can be a part of so many types of stories, and it seems a shame to limit the genre's parameters. This is actually hilarious. You think that because many fantasy movies and TV shows feature European folklore, myths, and legends, you think that it somehow is limiting fantasy as a genre. Fantasy, as a genre, exists in every culture. You said it yourself. The solution, therefore, is just to encourage the production of some fantasy stories from other cultures and backgrounds. Like, how about Aladdin? Does that not tie into 1001 Nights? What about Mulan? Kubo and the Two Strings? Moana? It can be done. It does not mean fantasy is limited. It just means we are capable of exploring stories from other cultures, and we are and have been. This is absolutely hilarious. For that matter, how is a story set in Europe, in European folklore and background, somehow limiting it? If I told the story of Beauty and the Beast in Korea, I can bet you money that the story is going to involve a beautiful girl, a frightening beast, and somehow true love will break the spell. Why? Because stories that are timeless and cross-cultural are not limited by barriers of time, race, or country, for their messages, themes, and motifs are often recognized by people of various backgrounds and belief systems. I think the one limited here is you. Number 5. It's okay for an evil to really die. It seems like the modern cinematic universe-obsessed film ecosystem is terrified of killing its villains, lest they prematurely remove a character with sequel potential. While recurring villains can be a compelling element of multi-part stories, and filmmakers have regularly killed them off prematurely in the past, creators have to be comfortable taking risks, even if that means losing future profits. In storylines like Loki's in the MCU, death ultimately loses all meaning. He appears to die so many times that it's hard to believe when he is actually killed. Loki may have been a compelling villain at the beginning, but his numerous defeats left him without narrative claws by the end. Now see, that's not a problem with fantasy, that's a problem with Marvel and comic books in general, because they just can't kill off anyone. As for making sure villains stay dead, in many fantasy stories they do, but the idea of the returning villain or evil trope is a reference to how evil never truly dies. Evil is not rooted to a single person or group, but it is something ever present. So long as greed, jealousy, lust, hate, and sin exist, there will be those who choose to take, steal, kill, rape, and harm in the name of their desires. Evil cannot be destroyed just by defeating a dark lord or a handful of his minions. Inevitably, evil can rise from anyone at any time. Thus, we see this portrayed in the return of villains or similar villains rising up where the old was. Number 4, animal spies are too powerful. Films like The Fellowship of the Ring use evil's ancient connection with vermin to establish the power of their villains. But this ability leaves heroes with no realistic way to win. Animals are everywhere. That may seem like a given, even in urban environments, but in fantasy stories, this simple fact gives many dark wizards virtually limitless information gathering abilities. In films like The Fellowship of the Ring, the heroes are required to avoid not only evil armies, but also ravens, rats, crows, and other animals often associated with black magic. The information gathering ability implied by this ability is beyond anything a ragtag group of heroes could ever hope to defeat. This trope strains credibility and takes audiences out of the story. I'm almost without words. I've heard stupid things, guys. I mean, really stupid things. I've heard absolutely cosmic idiocy in my time. But this might just take the cake. I can't believe you said this seriously. I can't believe you not only made this idiotic argument, but then followed it up with an example like Lord of the Rings. I'm actually floored by how monumentally stupid this is. Okay, so the argument is that when the villain has animals at their beck and call or assistance from animals like birds or rats, there is no, in their own words, no realistic way to win. There's no way for our heroes to win against the abilities of animals or their information gathering abilities, since animals are everywhere. Just like in Lord of the Rings, when the Crab-Eye from Dunlin told Saruman the location of the Fellowship. This takes away credibility from the story. We just can't see how the heroes could possibly win. Yeah, I suppose that's true. Except, hold on. What if the good guys have animals too? I seem to recall Gandalf having eagle back up in the exact same movie, and then the same eagles appearing again in the final film. So, if the good guys have animal assistance, does that matter? Does that help? Does that counterbalance anything? Another question, how does getting information through animals make the villains unbeatable? How does it take away from the credibility of the story? You are aware that in our world, with a cell phone and Wi-Fi, we can get almost any information we want within seconds, right? Does that mean we can no longer tell modern stories anymore because the information gathering abilities of the modern day are just too insurmountable? Oh, wait, another question. Since you obviously didn't think at all about this, if animal spies make the villains unbeatable, how come the good guys still won? Why did you use the example of Fellowship of the Ring, when even though Saruman used those birds and those rats and those animals, how did the heroes still win in the end of the story? I thought you said it was insurmountable, that there was no realistic way to win. How does that work then, CBR? I'm positively stunned by how stupid that was. The stupid I've just read is mind-blowing. I think we best keep going, unless my brain melts and run out to my ears. Oh my goodness. Number 3. Heroes need to be diverse. The classic image of a fantasy hero, cultivated through decades of uninspired filmmaking, is almost always a white man. Though this trope is being combated across different types of media, it still dominates the genre. The white male hero may seem inescapable as a fantasy film trope, but it doesn't have to be. Heroes come in all shapes and sizes, and their stories come from all cultures. More diverse writing or more diverse casting of pre-existing characters creates more diverse stories, which are usually improvements. Why should heroes all look and sound the same? And there it is. I knew it was coming. You knew it was coming. I think we were all waiting for this. We need more diverse heroes, folks. White male heroes are just an overdone trope. It has nothing to do with the cultural background of the stories being told, the intentions of the author wanting to be historically and culturally accurate, or the idea that heroics are not bound by race, gender, or background. No. It's all a tired, old, annoying trope. All right, let's break down this text. First, the classic image of a fantasy hero, cultivated through decades of uninspired filmmaking, is almost always a white man. Uninspired filmmaking. Really? Okay. Or perhaps it was being true to the stories that the films were trying to retell? And why do fantasy heroes have to exist in film? You are aware that most fantasy stories and fairy tales existed in books, legends, and folklore first, right? To follow that up, though this trope is being combated across different types of media, it still dominates the genre. Well, maybe that's because many of the fantasy mediums that are being drawn from are based on folklore, legends, and stories from European origins and influence. Maybe it has less to do with uninspired filmmaking, like you said, and more to do with respecting the cultural heritage of the stories being told. But no, I'd be crazy for assuming that. You then say, the white male hero may seem inescapable as a fantasy film trope, but it doesn't have to be. Heroes come in all shapes and sizes, and their stories come from all cultures. Well, yes, they do. So why are you offended that there are a lot of white male heroes? Why is this a bother to you? You call it uninspired. And remember, folks, that this is a list of the 10 worst tropes in fantasy. So the fact that there are a lot of white male heroes is one of the worst things about fantasy to you. Does my gender and skin color offend you that much that if I were to star in a Beowulf movie, you would get upset? You then say, more diverse writing or more diverse casting of pre-existing characters creates more diverse stories, which are usually improvements. False. 100% false. In fact, current box office records and critical scores have seen that making heroes and stories diverse for the sake of diversity tends to lead to horrible results. Note what he said. Guys, note this. Diverse casting or pre-existing characters. Diverse casting of pre-existing characters. He's not talking about movies or stories told about African fantasy stories or Asian fantasy stories. No. Simply taking a pre-existing hero or story, like, say, Hercules, and just making him black or female just for the sake of diversity. You are aware that this line of thinking has actually destroyed films, right? When you care more about the race and gender of your cast and writers more than you do about the quality of your story, your project is doomed to failure. But then you say this line: why should heroes all look and sound the same? My God, you did not just say that. Guys, I'm going to read that again. And really, guys, let that sink in contextually. Let this sink in. Why should heroes all look and sound the same? He means white men. Why should all heroes, being white males, look and sound the same? My God. For just one moment, everyone, imagine if I'd said, why do all black men have to look and sound the same? Imagine if I'd said that. This is so unbelievably racist. You assume that all white heroes in film and fantasy look and sound the same? Yes, Harry Potter is completely indistinguishable from Luke Skywalker. No differences in how they talk or act, right? No accent difference, age difference, hair color or eye color difference. No difference in motivation, no difference in background or age, none of it. Just, they're both white men. They look alike, right? They just talk and act and look alike. Yeah, totally. Holy shit. Guys, this might be one of the most racist articles I've read from CBR, and they said that fully unironically. I could end it here, but let's entertain that racist statement for just a moment. I'm going to be nice and overlook how bigoted that was and actually address the other problem therein. Let's assume that all white people do just look and sound exactly the same. We're going to remove the reality that white as a racial profile can apply to various cultures with their own various folklores, fairy tales, and beliefs. But we're going to ignore all that. But the truth is that no matter what the heroes look or sound like, the stories will be unique. The whole thing that this person is advocating for is, look, you could tell these same stories with multiple different racial groups and it would still be the same. Why do they all have to be white? Because the culture defines the story. The themes of Aladdin might be cross-cultural, but the setting, elements, and conflict are unique to Arabian folklore and legends. You could not simply make Aladdin black, throw him in Africa, and have the exact same story. You could not take Mulan and make her Hispanic and have the exact same story. Her world and culture that formed her story are unique to her, and there is reason behind why she is where she is and why she is what she is. In the same vein, you cannot take Lord of the Rings, change all the characters or environment to be more diverse, and expect it to still be the same story fundamentally, because the story directly ties to a culture that is originated in European history. But you know what I find interesting? This once again proves your racism, that you believe you can just change out a person's skin color, like it's just a cosmetic rather than a part of who they are or where they come from. We are all equal in the eyes of God, but our experiences, background, and cultures can be vastly different. European culture does not look the same as Asian or African or Latin cultures. In fact, what do you even mean by European cultures or Asian cultures? There are various cultures within those continents. Your pitiful understanding of culture and its use in defining characters and stories shows that you have no business even trying to understand fantasy. I would not change Black Panther to a white man for the same reason I would not change Beowulf into a black woman. It has nothing to do with diversity. It has everything to do with respecting the integrity of the original culture and origins of the story, you absolute fool. And yes, what you said was racist. Let's move on. Number 2, heroic bloodlines limit heroes' accomplishments. Royal bloodlines may be a factor in most fantasy films, but they ultimately limit heroes. Even if viewers can ignore the obvious issues with feudalism and authoritarianism and its historic abuses, it's just not compelling. In movies like the classic Sword in the Stone, the hero's accomplishments are actually diminished by his royal bloodline. Arthur begins his story as an orphan stable hand. Through his sense of justice and his wit, as well as a little luck, he ascends to the throne of England. Imagine if he did all that and removed the sword from the stone, not because he was secretly the lost son of the previous king, but because his actions proved he was worthy. I love how the author begins by saying that royal bloodlines are bad for characters and then adds on, even if we ignore the historical abuses of feudalism and authoritarianism. I'm sorry, but what do political ideologies have to do with a character's ability to grow or be appreciated? If I write a story about a princess learning to be an effective queen, would you say that it's just not a good story because she's going to be living in a feudalistic society? Feudalism was not perfect, but it had its place, and we are more than capable of writing compelling characters who live within such societies. Hi, Game of Thrones. Anyone remember that one? But then we move on to The Sword and the Stone, an odd choice for an example. You seem to be falling back on your previous point about chosen ones, only this time replacing the chosen one with being of royal blood. But your problem is three things. First of all, Arthur in The Sword and the Stone was never actually stated to be the son of the previous king, but that's a nitpick, I admit, so let's move on to the second problem. Why does having royal blood make you less compelling? Aragorn in Lord of the Rings is directly related to the Gondorian royal family, and he is heir to the throne of Gondor. Is his story less compelling because of his blood? Actually, his story is compelling partly because of his blood. He is ashamed of his legacy and feels conflicted, afraid he will make the same mistakes as his ancestors. He has to learn to embrace that he is now the king of Gondor and finally assume the role he was always meant to have. How is that not compelling? And finally, and I think this question really needs to be asked, many fairy tales involve princes and princesses. Are they less compelling because of their royal blood? Any Disney princess or prince now is just less compelling to audiences because of their royal blood? Can a character of royal blood not prove themselves worthy of their title? A great example, in fact, two great examples, would be Thor from the Marvel Cinematic Universe or Simba from The Lion King. Both are princes who were destined to rule by blood, but neither were worthy at first. Simba and Thor were both trapped in a belief that a king could do whatever they wanted and were both forced to confront the results of their hubris. Simba was shamed and forced to flee his home after the accident that killed his father. Please note, I'm aware it was not an accident, but I'm looking at this from the character growth angle, so it's from Simba's perspective. Thor, meanwhile, was stripped of his power and rights and forced to live as a mortal. Through both of their experiences, Simba is forced to recognize that he can't run from his past any longer and has to recognize his duty to his pride and not to himself. He can't wallow in self-pity any longer. And then Thor was forced to realize what it means to rule and what the common people live through and endure and why he must consider other people lesser than himself. But I suppose because they're of royal blood, therefore the stories just aren't compelling. In fact, let's take another look at The Sword and the Stone. Let's say that Arthur is the son of the previous king. Was he ready to rule? When he started out, he was just a mere stable boy who dreamed of becoming a knight. Was he ready? Was he ready to pull that sword from the stone? No, that's why Merlin met with him to educate him, to help teach him, to help him learn and grow and become the kind of king he needed to be later on. He was not ready. Just because you have royal blood, oh my gosh, I just realized it. This is again you showing your obvious bigotry. You don't like people who are born to authority or born to money or born a specific way. You don't like that because you think it makes for poor storytelling. No one wants to hear the stories of a person who was born to success. Sometimes being born to success can create a great story when that person either isn't worthy of it or being born to success means they have to take on responsibilities that they don't understand, aren't ready for, or misunderstand. This is fantastic. You don't understand writing. You don't understand character growth. You don't understand creativity as a whole. You think that because a character is born to a royal bloodline or lineage, you just assume that means, oh, well, we're not going to be able to appreciate their story because it means that we can't look at the content of their character or who they are. You are aware that even a king is a character. Even a king has feelings, desires, wants. There are good kings. There are evil kings. There are good queens. There are evil queens. People in power can be just as compelling as people who are not in power. Why do we have this idea that people born to power or born to privilege or born to wealth somehow are lesser because of it? Not only are you racist, you are anti everything that has to do with good storytelling. You hate the elite. You hate those in power. That's why you had to make that bash on feudalism and authoritarianism. Because you just assume that a king who rules a feudalistic state or is an authoritarian by nature cannot be a unique or fascinating character to follow. This is outstanding. Let's move on. Last one. Number 1. Faceless goons are people too. The faceless goon is a well-worn trope in cinema, used to excuse heroic characters from the immorality of violence. This is an effective means for the audience and the hero themselves to not feel the emotional trauma that comes from the act of killing. Take, for example, Luke Skywalker killing stormtroopers. Death, in any form, is sad on some level, and the wholesale killing of evildoers is also the act of robbing them of their opportunities for redemption. That is not to say that wars are never necessary. However, emotional callousness is not heroic. Viewing killing as good because it is necessary makes this choice easier even when it's avoidable. The Faceless goons' helmets remove their identity for a reason. It makes it harder for viewers to remember that they're human. You think that the existence of faceless goons or a standard bad guy minion or organization is meant to excuse wanton violence. You say the wholesale act of killing evildoers is also the act of robbing them of their opportunity for redemption. You then say emotional callousness is never heroic. Let's take all that and run with that. Bear in mind, everyone, that this article is called The 10 Worst Tropes in Fantasy. So tell me, the stormtroopers and the orcs and the goblins and the demons that we fight in different movies, TV shows, and video games and anime, are they not meant to be defeated? This all seems to go back to your first point about how fighting for good is fine, but just don't forget the villains have a point to make too. Now you're saying that it's wrong to have nameless drones or minions to serve the villains because killing them is emotional callousness and they don't have a chance for redemption. The funny thing is that I don't entirely disagree with the sentiment that we could explore the humanity of stormtroopers, I guess. The revelation that Finn from the new Star Wars series was a stormtrooper who defected implies that the stormtroopers are human and could have personal stakes and ideas about why they fight and what they fight for. The problem is that this is never explored further in the movies and is hand-waved away with, "My men are exceptionally trained and programmed from birth." I'm not saying we can't explore the villains a bit and why they do what they do. That could actually make for compelling drama, in fact. But that does not change the reality that they fight on the evil side. Please tell the story of a stormtrooper squad that defects. Tell the story of stormtroopers who remove their helmets to make it harder for the good guys to shoot them. That's fine. Explore that. In fact, funny thing is, I actually came up with a cool idea for Finn. What if, Finn was actually in training with Captain Phasma. The two went through the same training courses together and they became really close friends. Both had their own reasons for joining the Empire. And Captain Phasma really cared about Finn and wanted him to rise up in the ranks. So she was the one who said, "I know he's a janitor, but Commander, I really want him to join us on this battle. I want him to have the chance to shine." So he takes Finn out into the battle even though he's not ready and he has post-traumatic stress from what happened. And she's concerned about him. Instead of going, submit your blaster for inspection. She goes, "Hey, Finn, you okay? You did okay out there. You did good. You bagged at least 2 of them." And he goes, and he just tells her, "I don't know what I was doing out there. That was really rough on me. That was hard." And she goes, "Hey, look, you'll get over it. It's fine. They're just resistance. It's not a big deal." Show that one side is different from the other. Maybe she reminds him, "Remember why we joined the First Order in the first place? Remember why we joined up with this faction?" But then later when Finn defects, she can't believe it. She even tries to make excuses. Maybe he's trying to win their trust or something. Like maybe she can't believe that her friend would defect. So when they meet again, she goes, "Finn, how could you do this to me? How could you do this to me? We were friends. I stuck up for you. I was your ally." We are exploring the stormtroopers as characters. It makes it much more entertaining for us to understand these individuals. Captain Phasma has purpose. Finn has purpose. You can even have it that maybe in the final movie, Finn even meets with stormtroopers who he used to know. And at first they call him traitor, but then he tells them, "No, listen to me. I've learned things. I understand things. I know things about the First Order that would make your skin crawl." And maybe he tries to appeal to them. There could be a whole stormtrooper civil war. There could be a lot there to explore. I'm not saying you can't explore it. But you need to remember that whatever you do with them, the stormtroopers are still on the villain faction. They are a threat. They are a force to be opposed by the good guys. And if you want to make some of the stormtroopers turn good, that's fine. If you want to make some of the stormtroopers more unique or interesting or engaging, that's fine. But regardless of how you feel about them, you have to make the choice about whether or not you should stand up to the oppressive and villainous authoritarian automatons or not. I would think someone like you would know that. You also say, viewing killing as good because it is necessary makes this choice easier even when it's avoidable. Wow, that's laughable. If killing is necessary, then that means it is unavoidable. Necessary means it has to be done. I do not have to view killing as good just because it is necessary. I may not like killing. I may not like shooting the guy on the other end of the battlefield, but it doesn't change that I might have to do it. If I was a soldier fighting on the front lines and I have to shoot the guy across the field, I don't know anything about this guy. I don't have to like what I'm doing, but that doesn't change the reality that it has to be done. But you know what? Let's do this. Let's play a hypothetical game. I am a substitute teacher, and let's say one day while subbing, a man comes into the school with a gun and starts trying to kill random faculty, staff, and students. Let's say he busts into my classroom and starts aiming his gun around the room to pick off students. In my pocket is a knife. Is his death necessary in order to save lives? Should I use that knife to fight for my life and the lives of the students? Or would you tell me that is all entirely avoidable? Would you tell me that I need to consider his opportunity for redemption and wait and see if he can be talked down? Should I take that risk? Here's another one. I'm walking down the street when I hear a scream for help. A woman is in an alley with a man who is trying to force himself on her behind a dumpster. She is in pain. She needs help. The man in question is going to violate her. Do I stand there and rationalize this situation? Do I try to take a moment and contemplate the many twists and turns of this man's life to understand what brought him to this moment? Do I consider that by hurting him, I might be presuming my own moral compass to be higher than his, and that by fighting for good, I am in the same metric, ignoring his own personal views about what I perceive to be good? Do I need to take a moment to philosophically analyze the role of humanity and how this has been caused before and why he is acting the way he is, and maybe try to reach him on an interpersonal level? Or do I stop him by force if necessary? Do you draw your sword against wickedness and evil, or do you stand there trying to rationalize it away? What you seem to forget is that regardless of the human behind the stormtrooper helmet, they are still agents of evil. They are enforcers of wickedness and wrong. Whether they are human, alien, or mindless robots, it does not matter. The one who chooses wickedness is the one who stands opposed to righteousness, and the heroes in Star Wars tend to fight for righteous causes. Even if I went with my story where Captain Phasma and Finn are friends, if Captain Phasma remains on the villainous side and is forced to fight Finn, she probably has to die. Now, her death may be heavy, it may come with a lot of weight, it may be hard to handle, but at the end of the day, she will have to be stopped. So do the stormtroopers. You sitting here trying to say, oh, but what if they could be redeemed? Why do they have to be faceless? It's so wrong to just kill them without any moral quandaries. I'm not going to sit here and shed tears over men who choose to destroy me and probably wouldn't shed any themselves. I do not have to like killing to understand that sometimes it is necessary. I do not have to like opposing evil, but I understand it's a necessary thing to do. I don't know why you're saying this. Are you saying that it's overdone, that the faceless minion thing is overdone? Is that what you're saying? Where else is it done? I mean, yeah, you have stormtroopers and orcs, but how often do you see this in Disney movies and fairy tales and stuff like that? I don't understand this criticism. I don't understand why this is one of the worst tropes ever. They are the evil faction. Are you asking me to feel bad for the evil faction? This whole list of tropes that you say are the worst in fantasy are baffling, not only in choice, but also in how you explain they're wrong. From what I've gathered, you want to replace existing fantasy story characters with different races and genders for no other reason than diversity. You want every moral outlook in the story to be questioned, contemplated, and rationalized to the point that we even question what is good versus evil, despite the fact that most fairy tales are built on the understanding of good versus evil as their very theme. You want to remove and belittle ancient knowledge and lessons as they have little relevance to a modern world that's gone beyond them. And you want to tell fantasy stories outside of Europe because of how European cultures and settings somehow limit the genre as a whole. You are foolish. Woe be to anyone who dares to take your advice. Would you take the movie Swan Princess and make all the characters black? Would you make Rothbard, or whatever the villain's name was, relatable, sympathetic, redeemed in the end so he becomes a good guy? Would you make Derek, the prince, a complete pansy who chooses not to fight to win his battles, but rather to negotiate despite any evil or danger imposed on him or others? Would you also tell it in Africa because Europe is just so limiting? In Star Wars, would you make Luke Skywalker an Asian girl? Would you have her refuse to pick up a lightsaber for fear it would hurt someone? Would you have her talk down to Yoda, saying that Yoda just doesn't understand the way of the galaxy today and she needs to get with the times? That morality isn't black and white. Would you make the stormtroopers all just take off their helmets in the end and reject their former master saying they want to be good, and then somehow she defeats Palpatine with force powers that change his whole moral outlook to good because she doesn't want to kill him, she wants him to be redeemed? All of this may sound far-fetched to you, my listener, but this is the direction not only seen in this article, but I've been seeing in films lately. There is a desire to change background, race, and gender for no other reason than for diverse reasons, trying to be morally complex in characters while still trying to incorporate action scenes, mocking the lessons of the past or of the elderly as old-fashioned and unnecessary or even flawed. It's all hysterically bad. This article boiled my blood because as a writer myself who loves fantasy, I recognize the power and strength that comes with complex writing, unique cultural backgrounds, writing characters to be characters rather than just diverse tokens. I do not write a character to be black or Asian or Hispanic or white just because I'm like, all right, let me check off that box. I write it because those characters are unique and their backgrounds and individual looks and designs and wants and motives are all vastly important to who they are and where they come from. I do not write a story taking place in Spain because I just like Spain or because I feel like we need to change up the dynamic, but because Spain is where I want the story to take place because of the cultural and influential backgrounds around it. I do not write a mentor character to be stupid because I want that mentor character to be someone who has an impact on the main hero. I do not write fantasy to just say, oh, let's deal with these moral quandaries. I want the villains to be, unique characters that could potentially change. It's fine to write villains as unique characters with their own backgrounds and wants and motives and morals. It's fine. But I'm not going to sacrifice the reality that they also still have to be stopped. It does not matter if the person behind the stormtrooper helmet could be redeemed, or that they are human, or that they have their own wants or desires. If they desire my death and are willing to pursue that, then it is me or them. That is what Han Solo, Luke, and Leia have to deal with when they shoot back. It is war. And as you said yourself, war sometimes is necessary. And when it is necessary, I cannot afford the luxury of saying, well, they're human too. Because when you stand up to evil or wickedness, as is the case with the stormtroopers, with the orcs, with Maleficent, with every other villain faction, when you stand up to wickedness, you must be prepared to fight. You must be prepared to fight to remove wickedness. I know that this article was supposed to be about, fantasy, and I know it turned into something much bigger. I hope you guys enjoyed, but I got a shocking surprise for you guys. There's more to this. There's another article, this one a little bit less egregious, about One Piece, and about the top 10 worst tropes from One Piece. I'll be taking a look at that next time. Until then, I will see you in my next video. Take care.